Fernand. Awesome.
Hi, hello, and welcome to another video by the WuMao show. My name is Fernando Muñoz Bernal. This is my channel Fermove, and today I am joined by a very important figure in Chinese in the Chinese information sphere. His name is Harold, and he is joining us today simultaneously on his channel. We are sending this video to my channel and his channel, Harold in China. So if you guys haven't subscribed to Harold's channel, make sure to do that. I'm going to leave a link in the description down below. So Harold, good morning. I'm in Dongguan at the moment. Where are you? And introduce yourself to our audiences, please.
Yes, well, thanks for this very friendly introduction of the little me. So I'm currently in Shanghai. I've lived for several years in Beijing. Before that, I've recently started a new job in Shanghai, and that's where I am. And regarding China watching, so I've started around 2006, maybe in my bachelor time when I studied economics, to get interested in China. And since then, I've been learning Chinese as well. And so I think that's an important aspect. I mean, you become a China expert just by keep looking at China and what's happening in China. That's like my opinion. So there are shortcuts by reading, obviously, but in the end, the longer you care for this country, the more you will pick up. And I've been active a long time on LinkedIn, where I wrote a lot about China, maybe for the 10 years ago, I think about that's when I started with LinkedIn. Since LinkedIn got withdrawn from China by Microsoft, I've kind of stopped because LinkedIn is one of the most annoying ones. I mean, other social media, like if you have a regular VPN, it's really easy to use them, but LinkedIn is always like really a mess for me to get on. So I find it very difficult. And so recently I've started, as you mentioned, my YouTube channel, Harold in China. I'm still rather new to the video format. Also, this is my first live stream, so please, I apologize to every viewer if I don't do it as professionally as Fernand and others that you
Great, man. You're
regularly
doing
may
great.
see.
All right. The first thing that I would like to say to our audience is the thumbnail mentioned our three channels, my channel, Harold, and Daniel Dumbrell. Daniel Dumbrell has recently moved to Chongqing, and with the beginning of the school year, he has mentioned earlier today that he's just too busy. He has to attend some parent-teacher meetings. So if he finds a little bit of time, he's going to join us. He's got the link. So, but we're going to start the show just me and Harold and see if at any point Daniel can join us. So unfortunately, it's not for sure. But anyway, Harold, we wanted to start talking about this video that I watched and that you watched it as well, from a Joe Rogan interview of Mark Zuckerberg. So I don't know if you guys have seen it, but I would like to play it to you. Okay, for moving, my volume is low. Well, Harold's volume is too high. Let me see if I can fix that 1 second. Okay, let's watch the video and I'll see if I can fix my volume on my side. Okay, so let me play this. It's a couple of minutes, but it's a very important video, and we'll see you at the end of this video to discuss some of the things that they mentioned.
How do you guys handle things when they're a big...
Sorry, guys. Quick question. In the comment section, let us know if you can actually hear the video, because I would like to know if it's playing out right. It's 2 minutes, so somebody please leave a comment saying, yes, we can hear the video. Here it goes.
How do you guys handle things when they're a big news item that's controversial? Like there was a lot of attention on Twitter during the election because of the Hunter Biden laptop story. The New York
we
Post.
have that too.
Yeah, so you guys censored that as well?
So we took a different path than Twitter. I mean, basically the background here is the FBI, I think, basically came to us, some folks on our team, and was like, hey, just so you know, like you should be on high alert. There was we thought that there was a lot of Russian propaganda in the 2016 election. We have it on notice that basically there's about to be some kind of dump of that's similar to that. So just be vigilant. So our protocol is different from Twitter's. What Twitter did is they said you can't share this at all. We didn't do that. What we do is we have, if something is reported to us as potentially misinformation, important misinformation, we also have this third-party fact-checking program because we don't want to be deciding what's true and false. And for I think it was 5 or 7 days when it was basically being determined whether it was false, the distribution on Facebook was decreased, but people were still allowed to share it. So you could still share it, you could still consume it.
So when you say the distribution is decreased,
it got shared.
How does that work?
It basically, the ranking in newsfeed was a little bit less. So fewer people saw it than would have otherwise. So it definitely...
By what percentage?
I don't know off the top of my head, but it's meaningful. But basically, a lot of people were still able to share it. We got a lot of complaints that was the case. Obviously this is a hyper political issue. So depending on what side of the political spectrum, you either think we didn't censor it enough or censored it way too much. But we weren't sort of as black and white about it as Twitter. We just kind of thought, hey, look, if the FBI, which I still view as a legitimate institution in this country, it's like very professional law enforcement, they come to us and tell us that we need to be on guard about something, then I want to take that seriously.
Did they specifically say you need to be on guard about that story?
No, I don't remember if it was that specifically, but it basically fit the pattern.
All right, so I don't know if you guys in the audience had seen this video before, but it is worth mentioning many different things. So I would like to ask you, Harold, what are some of your thoughts when you watch this video? I have like 4 things that I would like to say, but I'll start with you, Harold.
Yeah, it's such a condensed video that shows so much that's going on. There's so many aspects that can be discussed. And I think the elephant in the room is we're both China watchers. We're talking about China. Now, if you're in China and then go on criticize censorship in the US, that comes across very hypocrite. So I think we should address this question. And I've done a video, I've just done one yesterday about this question: why do I think censorship in China and censorship in the US is fundamentally different from a system perspective? Like, the political system in the US cannot function when the government, or let's say parts of the government or deep state or administration, or however you want to call it, when they start censor one side of the political debate. That's in direct contradiction with the design of the system. Whereas in China, the design of the system is very different. And I think we'll discuss about that during this show. Another aspect, of course, is, the question, what does he say and what probably happened? And I'm pretty sure that people are aware that these leaders of big corporations, they don't say what they think. The statement, he doesn't remember by how much it was decreased. These kind of, they are briefed. They're very much prepared for these kind of sessions. I was very targeted, and I'm sure he also had in advance in mind that he was going to blame the FBI for censoring the Hunter Biden laptop story. So to blame it on the FBI, I don't know if viewers here have seen the Jimmy Dore show. He did a great take on this whole topic. Jimmy Dore hates Mark Zuckerberg, so he's much more from an emotional perspective. But I think he has some good points there, saying, that was just BS. And maybe from my background, I've worked at TikTok a while back. Now I'm not working at TikTok anymore. That's why I can even mention this. Otherwise, I wouldn't be allowed to say this, of course. I've been in touch with the U.S. government relations people, and I'm just aware, U.S. government relations, I've never seen a department that is so not caring about truth, but only caring about narrative. So U.S. politics is all about narrative. The question, well, is it accurate or not, is only considered to the point of, can we plausibly deny if we're accused of lying, or can it be discovered? but not like, like from an ethical point of view, you shouldn't lie. That's just not a consideration in that field. And I'm sure Facebook is even worse. And on the other hand, I mean, I also do want to some extent, defend Mark Zuckerberg, to be honest, because he's leading a huge company in the US that's been in the spotlight in the US Congress. And, if you're leading a company and the government of your country where your headquarters are is attacking you, I mean, you have to be careful how much you want to fight back. So from an entrepreneur perspective, from a business leader perspective, I see the challenge that he faces. So it's not that black and white, in my opinion. I mean, you can say we want a democratic revolution in the US, like Jimmy Dore is basically saying, and from that perspective, Mark Zuckerberg is not a supporter of that, kind of taking back the power to the people. But from a business perspective, it's not easy to deal with a government that puts pressure on you. And I think what's good is that the hypocrisy is falling now. So yes, China does put pressure on companies, Western companies. Many have pulled back from China because of that. But the US equally puts pressure on the companies. And of course, one topic is the US. For me as a European, we're fully relying on those American social media. So that's a whole other bag of chips that we're opening there, that if the US is censoring US social media based on US national interests, but Europe is using those social media as the only platform that European society has, then of course that means European society is completely censored according to American national interests. And yeah, all right. So that's a whole other topic.
One thing, Harold, one thing that you mentioned that I wanted to talk about is that straightforward. They're talking about, okay, the FBI told you to watch out for this news. Then the news were basically said, be careful that this misinformation is coming from Russia. This begs the question, what is misinformation? Why do I ask this question? Because when you look at what has been disclosed after many, many months of what actually was in Hunter Biden's laptop, now you're wondering, was it really misinformation? Is it really misinformation? Or is it just something that they knew would affect the campaign of Joe Biden, and they didn't want that information to be out there in the public? So misinformation, is it understood it's coming from Russia, so we don't want you to see it, we don't want you to watch it, or we don't like what is coming. We don't like the message that is coming because it's going to affect, basically the election. That's an important differentiation to make. I am very confident in saying that what I have seen put in public as the content of Hunter Biden's computer, it puts many, many things into question, brings many questions to the forefront, and I doubt that we could actually label this as misinformation. It's not misinformation because the information that was provided was not true. It has been classified misinformation because it's coming from sources that we don't like. Think of Julian Assange, for example. Nobody can dispute the things that Julian Assange has showed us as the acts of murder and acts of crimes against innocent people that the American military has committed. But we are going after Julian Assange because this information was not delivered to the public in channels that the American government deemed to be appropriate. I mean, would they ever let us know what actually took place? How they were just sending drones to kill innocent families like they did before they left Afghanistan. The family of 10 where 7 children were killed. The information is real, but when they don't like where the information is coming from, then they call it misinformation. That's the first thing that comes to my mind when we watch this video about Mark Zuckerberg. So the FBI is pushing these companies to censor themselves. And then we go into the second aspect of this conversation when Mark Zuckerberg says, look, Twitter, when full on, this cannot be shared. Is that manipulation of the election? Is that manipulation of what perception people would have of Joe Biden and his family and his hypocrisy? Because I'm going to show you another video in 1 second. That's the first thing. Twitter went full on, you cannot share this. What is the effect on the public? What is the effect on the elections? And the second part is when Zuckerberg says, we were trying to gauge it. We were trying to minimize its sharing. We were trying to minimize the ability that people had to see this news on Facebook. So who makes them judge and jury? Give me your thoughts about that particular part, Harold.
Yeah, I think, I mean, you really well put it out, and it's basically a question, which rabbit hole do we want to go down to? I mean, there is the first one, the content itself. I mean, Hunter Biden's story, like the laptop, the drugs, the scandals, like the corruption, like and of course it has to be tied together with Ukraine. So there's like the whole content side of the story, which is just extreme. I mean, we could do a whole live stream about that one. But I don't want to get too much into partisan politics of the US. I'm not an American. I also don't want to get too deep into that. Then there's the aspect, of course, of the whole question of who decided what in the US in a very specific context. And I totally agree. I mean, there's not just Julian Assange, there's Daniel Hale, there's Edward Snowden, and the list of dissidents in the US is growing. Like, you know, in the 90s, even 2000 still, there were like these famous Chinese dissidents that were known in the West and that were propped up by Western media. And it's become more and more quiet around that topic. But now we have more and more American dissidents, be they in US prisons, be they somewhere like Assange in England stuck, or in Russia in exile. Like this list is growing. And then there's on a even like maybe more theoretical, higher level, but I think also very important, there's like the abstract question of censorship. Like, should there be censorship? If yes, how much, and who decides what censorship is okay? And I know, like in this, like especially in this American kind of populist sphere, from the right, Tucker Carlson, to the left, maybe Jimmy Dore or Kim Iverson, there's this viewpoint of total freedom of speech and unrestricted. And in an American context, that kind of makes sense, because the American system is built on everybody being able to say their mind. And then the idea that somehow through a process of negotiation, the best ideas then get through and define like the direction of the country. I'm not convinced that this idea is actually feasible. Like, the reality is that those who have the big channels, that they always drive the communication. And before social media, that was like classic media, New York Times, Washington Post. When they put out an article, then it was in the public discussion. And if you're like a very intelligent revolutionary, some guy somewhere in some state in the US, you could write the best article in the world, but people wouldn't see it. So that's always been the case, that those with the economic power, they control the public discourse. So I don't believe in an absolute like free and equal market because of ideas, because that in the end, in reality, it will just devolve into shouting matches, and who shouts the loudest in the end gets their will. And that's what we see in the whole woke debate in the US, where like some people, very small group of people, can launch attacks against professors, against, you know, cultural figures, for having said one sentence, and their whole career of contributing to society is negated by one sentence where they said a keyword that these woke people don't like, and they can shout down the person. And I don't think that's an example of the best ideas winning. I think that's really the problem. And that's why I think a society needs to set boundaries. And that's where I maybe differ from most people in the West, that I say some censorship is necessary and okay. But the question indeed that you raise is who should do the censoring and based on what? Because as you correctly said in this Hunter Biden story, obviously it was not misinformation, and the censoring of an accurate description or even of original sources that were found, it just rings very much like manipulation, because clearly that was during the election campaign, and it was done by people who did not like the other candidate. So yeah, the question there is very clear. I mean, what was done was wrong. The theoretical question, I think, is much more difficult. Like, what's the right amount of censorship, and who's the one who should be doing?
We enter a little bit the realm of censorship in China, which is one of the things that we wanted to discuss. There is censorship in China. What I see as different is it's done for a harmonious existence of the Chinese society. There are aspects of censorship that upset me. For example, I made a video in Fuzhou talking about how Xi Jinping invited an American family to come because they had very deep ties to Guliang Mountain, and I showed a picture of Xi Jinping, and the Chinese platform said, like, you cannot show this. You are not like vetted to talk about this. So they put the video down. That upsets me. But at the same time, when we talk about this kind of censorship, I'm a nobody. When reporters, when journalists are working for CNN, working for Bloomberg, working for whatever outfit, are in China, and they're covering stories, they like to talk about, oh, we are censored, we are not allowed to go into these places, we're not allowed to go into those places. Most of the time, they know that they shouldn't, that they're not allowed to do something, that they're not allowed to go somewhere. If you remember that scene from the, I think it was a Deutsch journalist reporting during the Olympics, he was actually asked very politely by the security guard, sir, you cannot stand here, you need to stand there. That person knew exactly where the press had to be, and he chose to not be there. So this is live on TV, showing a person thing like, sir, you cannot shoot here. And you can see the smile of that journalist, like, this is exactly what I wanted. This is exactly what I wanted to portray as China being authoritative, China being controlling, China, like, hey man, he chose to do that. There's so many other instances and photos of this particular journalist. I call it the money shot. The money shot in journalism, which is basically a police officer saying, hey, you cannot shoot here, right?
Right.
Because they know they shouldn't be shooting there. It's clear and obvious that they can't shoot. And when they get that shot, then the smile of that particular journalist that I'm talking about in the Olympics. So there is censorship in China and there is censorship in the West. So for the West, but China is not shouting from the rooftops, oh, we have freedom of speech. You for example, in China, are not allowed to offend your representatives, to call them names, to, right? That's not allowed. And I would probably go as far as to say that that's not their culture, right? That's not how they handle things. But in America, you could say Joe Biden is this, and what is what they chanted the NASCAR, like,
Brandon,
go Joe Biden. Let's go Brandon. Yeah, but tell me, what else you wanted to say?
To be honest, I think also the US has changed culturally. Like, it may not have been illegal, but I don't think it was done. Like, people would just not insult on a personal level their president or representative, because it was just known that that's wrong. You respect those who lead the country because they represent the whole value that you stand for. So I think, yeah, the problem is, who said that? A famous person once said, I think was a business leader who said, like, those who always go to the limit of what's legally allowed, they're responsible for the laws getting ever stricter. Right? Because if you always say, like, well, it's legal and that's why I do the most extreme, obscene, and like really stupid things, or also like it was in the context of like tax avoidance and stuff. If you just like steal money from the public because there's a loophole in the law, well, then you're the one who forces the lawmakers to make ever stricter laws. And the same in this polite debate, or in the debate on what's censored and not censored. If people just don't know the limits of civilized debate, then that leads to calls for cutting them off. And I saw in the chat before somebody posted Russia does put out misinformation in the US. I actually don't doubt that. I think the Russians are much more advanced than the Chinese, or they also just more easily understand Western society because they're Europeans as well. So they're much more advanced in propaganda, like propaganda in the sense of really like illegitimately influencing the public debate. I think the Chinese do a very bad job at that. I mean, the best they can come up with is like these international channels of Chinese TV. And I've met people there. They're nice people. They're really trying their best. They love their country. They feel it very unfair that Westerners always talk bad about China. But the way they present China, it's just so stiff and so like the language and what you mentioned. I mean, the censorship in China, again, I think given how China is really under attack by a concentrated American misinformation campaign globally, trying to get like a narrative out that's negative on China, I understand that China does censor. But indeed, they do censor sometimes really weird things. For example, there's a law that you're not allowed to sing the national anthem in inappropriate situations. Like, there's a law who can use the Chinese flag in which occasions, where I'm just saying, like, well, Americans plaster their flag all over their clothes. And obviously sometimes those clothes get old and they're ripped and they don't look nice, but it's how Americans really rally around their flag because they all fight for what does it mean to be American. Whereas in China, Chinese are very patriotic, but they cannot show it in this way because, you cannot just freely use the flag. You cannot freely use the name China. And again, there's a reason for that. You cannot say, like, for example, in the Chinese version of TikTok, you cannot call your channel China anything. The reason is that
you don't represent China.
Well, the reason why that is very restricted is because a company that has China in its name is an official state-level national enterprise and like a government-owned entity. And that's where it gets a lot of trust from the public. And so to avoid private cheater companies abusing this trust from the public, they don't allow anyone to call themselves China, right? So there's always a reason behind it, but it leads to a situation where indeed some things are very strange, especially for us foreigners. And my Douyin channel got actually cancelled because, so Douyin is the Chinese TikTok, it got completely taken off because I used a flag that came from Wikipedia or somewhere, and on that the color of Taiwan was different from the rest of China, and that was by AI recognized as an illegal something, and the channel was closed. And when I appealed, they said, no, that's against the law. So you posted illegal stuff. So there you go. That's gone. So I mean, it's this combination of AI. It wasn't even about Taiwan, obviously. The whole video didn't have anything to do with Taiwan. Otherwise, I would have noticed. I didn't even look at that corner of the map. It was more like a world map. It was like 3 pixels in a different color. It's absurd, right? But it's like this combination of AI and strict rules that I think go too far. But the question is, again, what's the right level and who decides what's the right level? Because you need to set the boundaries in society. So it's definitely right.
In China,
of restriction.
In China, the mandate comes from the government. as we saw in Joe Rogan's video, Mark Zuckerberg is left to be the decider. Like, oh, we hire companies to decide if this is true or not. He's kind of like washing his hands. So like, I don't know. And it's not me. It's some companies who decide. And for 7 days, people were able to share here and there. So it's different in which the government is taking charge, and in the West is companies. And as corporations, they have this freedom of being a corporation in which the law doesn't apply to the person making the decision, but to the corporation itself. So it's the corporation that gets canceled, for example, it's the corporation that gets in trouble. One final thing that I wanted to say about reporters. Ask yourselves, why is it that you outside of China are able to see these reports? The police will stop the journalist. The police would tell them you cannot shoot here. The police would tell them you cannot do this. But they get to walk away with their cameras and their memory cards and their hard drives, and that's what they show you. True. Is that authoritative? Is that a regime that doesn't let them do their work here? No. If it were, they would probably confiscate the hard drives and the memory cards and whatnot. So be a bit skeptical of the messages that are being sent out. I just want to, before we go to the next topic, which is a little bit more to do with what we're seeing on TikTok, I want to talk to you. I want to talk to our viewers about something very, very relevant, and my mind just went blank for a second. Let me see if I can remember here. Okay, no. Let's go into what I wanted to talk about, which is point number 2, Harold, of our plan for this video. Where the servers are based is going to determine which government gets access to some of the data. It's one of the issues, for example, when servers are in America and all the data is stored in America, so governments, the American government could have access to some of that data. That happens with Google, that happens with Facebook, that happens with YouTube, etc. Servers are in America. What is the situation, if you can answer? If you can't, I understand. In terms of servers for a company like TikTok or Douyin?
Yeah, that's a very excellent point. And I think that's where also maybe comes my understanding of Mark Zuckerberg's statement from, because in TikTok, the servers had to be moved out of China for legal reasons, because exactly of that. US law does not allow American user data to be stored in China. And so I think the Eurasian servers are in Singapore and the American servers in the US. I'm not an expert, and I think actually ByteDance, they make this information very public because obviously they want to tell everyone that that's the case. But indeed, I mean, on the other hand, Chinese user data cannot be stored on servers outside of China. That's kind of the Chinese understanding of privacy rights, of data protection. They don't want foreign companies to gather data about Chinese citizens. And I kind of understand both the US and both China, that they say, I don't want other big countries to have a lot of data about our population. The ones I don't understand are the Europeans, or, I mean, the Global South, I understand that they're technically, financially, and from the whole capacity level, it's very difficult for them to think about these questions and institute rules. But I mean, Europe, that they allow all their data to be collected by the US, I think that's very surprising to me. So,
Harold, we are joined by Daniel. One second. Daniel. Let's welcome him. Daniel, how are you?
Hey, sorry, I just finished with the kids' school and finished at the gym for a quick session. So I thought I'd quickly join in and add a few words, because it was an interesting topic, but I couldn't make it in time for your start.
No worries.
We were basically talking about the accusations from the West on Douyin, on TikTok, and saying that the Chinese government can access data from users in the United States, and whether that is a valid accusation or not.
Right. Yeah, I think they don't seem to have evidence for that. But when you bring in the rest of the conversation, which I'm sure you shared the video already of showing how censorship on Facebook works, it seems like it's more an issue of being afraid that it's a social media network that can't be controlled by the systems in the US. First of all, can you guys hear me okay? I don't know if this mic is going to work out okay.
Yes, we're good. We're good.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah. So did you guys end up playing that video for the audience with Mark Zuckerberg?
Yes, we started with that.
Yeah. So for me, I mean, the main thing I wanted to add to that was that a lot of people always accuse people in China of living under censorship. And of course, anybody who's paying enough attention knows that, well, they live under censorship in the West also. But they're a little bit more smart about it by either boosting certain things or, trying to bury other things. And in a lot of ways, that's a far more dangerous kind of a censorship. There seems to be more of an awareness in China that certain things are blocked, or there are certain websites, you type it in, and you need a VPN in order to access it. But in the West, there are a lot of people that truly believe they are living under a free system, that they can access whatever they want and they aren't being manipulated, like they say the people in China are being manipulated. So they get this false sense of freedom. When it gets even more ridiculous is when they, supposedly say that they want to export their system to China and give China the same freedoms that they have, when that's a superficial statement because they're living under censorship as well, but a different form. And the interesting thing too about the Facebook video, if you really think about it, with Mark Zuckerberg, if somebody had started out in the beginning and said, you know what, I think this Hunter Biden laptop story, maybe there's something to it. It might be real, but I bet you, the CIA or the FBI is burying this story. They'd call you a conspiracy theorist. They'd be like, nah, that's ridiculous. You sound ridiculous. Then after, when it turns out that the Hunter Biden laptop story turns out, oh, there's some truth to this. And even then, if you say, yeah, there's some truth to it, I told you somebody was suppressing this information, it's probably the FBI or CIA. They'd still say you're a conspiracy theorist. But now you have this coming directly from Mark Zuckerberg saying, yeah, the FBI contacted us and said, be careful about this. It's Russian propaganda. Now we have that. But all those same people who were ready to call you a conspiracy theorist in the beginning, they're not going to take a back step and say, hold on a second. Maybe this system is not what I thought it was. Like, they don't have that point of reflection. It's almost a willful ignorance. The psychology behind it, I'm not sure why. Maybe they're so desperate to believe that they live in a superior society, or they're more superior than certain people overseas. I don't know, but there's a lot to see here, because this is the kind of censorship that we've been talking about for a long time, and we have multiple examples above and beyond this. But this is the most clear black and white example where Mark Zuckerberg's coming out and saying the exact same thing that people like us have been saying all along.
One of the things that I think is more consequential to this kind of misinformation or disinformation is that the public is led to a place where they don't know what to believe. I mean, we all heard, for example, about the PP tape for Trump in Russia, and that was the whole Russiagate scandal. Who are you going to believe? That puts the voter, the people in the middle between these two parties in that situation. We don't know who to believe. I just wanted to finish one sentence, one idea. That's the one that was flying out and I forgot about it. There seems to be a campaign on Twitter that has started just yesterday, again, about this new report about the Uyghur forced labor and whatnot. I just plead with any one of the viewers out there to go find any report that has any apodictic information. Apodictic means something that is absolutely true and can be ascertained with language. You read any report and everything that they say is full of it could be, it may be, it's possible, there's a probability, it is likely. This new report about some dates produced in Xinjiang that made it to the American market are now, they're making it into the American market, but these fruits are sanctioned because they are the product of forced labor in Xinjiang. Yeah. When you read that report, the word that says it is likely produced with forced labor, This basically means they have no facts. They have no proof. It's just an opinion that they have, something that they think it is. And since the probability is not zero, they get to say it. And therefore destroy the economy of Xinjiang.
Once we start that whole topic, I mean, I know Daniel has done a lot about Xinjiang. I've been there last year as well, and I've done some analysis of data as well. Like, we can do a whole live stream about that one. There's also a special rapporteur again who submitted a report to the Human Rights Council of the United Nations. And of course, some people put that out as, see, the United Nations confirms forced labor, which again, it's the same game they've played before. I don't know, do you want to open the Xinjiang topic? Like, Daniel, do you want to?
That would probably, that's one of the rabbit holes.
Yeah, on the topic of misinformation, I think that's really important to pay attention to the language, because that's something I've confronted some of the people who are at the head of pushing this propaganda do. When you look at them, they really carefully use this language. When Adrian Zenz was on CBC News in Canada on the forced tomato scandal, he said the risk of forced labor is very high. So they're taking all of these products off of the shelf. They're taking away business from Xinjiang companies at a risk, on a risk of forced labor. And when you try to pin these people down, like I did with one of these guys at one of these NATO-aligned think tanks in France, and you say, well, hold on a second. So do you say there's a genocide going on? And he said, no, I don't say that. I just say this, 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 this. And or no, he doesn't answer the question directly. He refuses to answer the question. Then when you find an article saying, well, look here, you said it was genocide in this article. He says, no, they misquoted me. That's a problem with the newspaper. That's not my responsibility. No, it would have been if the newspaper misquoted him in the other direction, he would have been all over it and said, can you make a correction to this? But the point is that these propagandists put this information out there with the hopes that people will take it one step further and say, oh, you mean this is happening? They want to be misunderstood. It even got to the point where there was a journalist in Australia from SBS News, when they were doing a hit piece on Robbie Barway for supposedly ambushing Vicky Xu, who used to be with ASPI, with a question, which was completely a ridiculous thing. When he was asking Robbie questions, he said, well, yeah, what about the mass graves that they uncovered in Xinjiang? And he said, what are you talking about?
He's a journalist.
He added that on himself, because as Robbie said, not even the worst detractors, not even the most anti-China people have even come up with that kind of a statement. And so that language, because, you see the headline, you see the title, not everybody will go in and read that they said, oh, only likely. And even the people who do read it, they won't pay close enough attention to say, oh, well, they're admitting they don't actually have evidence of this. So I think what you said in terms of language is really important.
It's all over. I mean, I did a video on the Bloomberg where they said, like, oh, we went to these polysilicon factories and we actually were not able to go into the factories and talk to workers or CEOs. So what are you admitting? That you don't have information, you don't know. But the conclusion of that quick take from Bloomberg is, if you buy polysilicon or solar panels with polysilicon from Xinjiang, you may be buying the product of forced labor. So they don't know, but here's our conclusion based on we don't know. And the worst thing about that particular piece from Bloomberg, this Murphy guy who posted a picture about Xi Jinping's book, the guy that they found in a coffee shop reading a Xi Jinping book. They're like, well, I'm getting my book number 3. I'm waiting for number 4. That guy had an expert saying in their piece saying that the likelihood of forced labor in the polysilicon industry in Xinjiang is almost non-existent. Yet the conclusion is, if you buy solar panels made with polysilicon from Xinjiang, you may be supporting forced labor. How do they get away? I mean, they know the level of stupidity, may I say, of the viewers and the readers. They know that they're not going to make the connection between this kind of language of uncertainty and the consequences that they cause. I played before that video, I think it was you, Daniel, who drew me to that video from Richard Nephew when he's selling his book, The Art of Sanctions, and he talks about Iran. And he says, well, we went after jobs. We want to create unemployment because that is going to create unrest and is going to destabilize the country and the region. That's the playbook. That's the plot. That video upsets me to you can't imagine to what degree, because it's exactly what they're doing in Xinjiang. The same thing. So,
and
Harold,
I want to just add one thing about the absurdity of accusing Xinjiang of forced labor. If we look at the whole prison labor system in the US, which is to a large extent privatized, where people are forced to work for $1 a day, or even in some states for no salary at all. So they're forced to work. The U.S. Constitution even says slavery is not allowed except as a form of punishment. So it's allowed according to the U.S. Constitution, and that's very clearly forced labor. And they say, well, but they're criminals. Yeah, well, they're criminals. Are they though? I mean, how many are convicted by mistake? Some of them actually get into debt because they even have to pay for their stay in prison. And then they're indebted and they cannot pay. And because of that, they get back into prison. So like this whole system. And that's where I find it very impressive, to use a positive term, how the US is able to control the narrative, to control the global discussion on things. Whenever the Chinese government makes a statement, it's called Chinese propaganda. The Chinese propaganda says the Chinese talking points are, that's like how it's framed in the media. And when the US government or agencies say something, then it's like presented as the fact, right? And when you read down, it's like the X and Y of the US government is the one who said that. So this control of the narrative, and I want to maybe mention the China-Africa project. I think it's called now China Global South. They did recently an excellent podcast on this aim of China to get more of this ability to control the global narrative, so the discourse power, they call it in this podcast. And it's a very interesting topic, and I think China absolutely needs to do that, because it's not even just the question of who lies more and who lies less. It's also the question, which questions get asked? Because if you ask Western people about China, what they will think of is Taiwan, Hong Kong, Xinjiang, COVID, and perhaps Tiananmen, 1989, that's like 33 years ago. If you ask Chinese about China, what they care about, it's like this massive build-up, the development, the improvement of their lives, the daily topics, and the freedom of people to do things they want to do has increased dramatically over the last 20, 50 years. And that's just not discussed, because even when we say freedom, Americans, Western people, Europeans automatically think of a system of having votes to decide who's the leader of the government. Whereas I'm thinking, like, how much does that really affect your personal freedom? Even the venting on social media and insulting your government on social media, is that really the freedom that affects your daily life, Mo?
Yeah, and
and how does it change your life?
Well, yeah.
Well, I always
what's the jigwa? What's the result? You okay, great. You can go out and you can protest the Iraq war, whatever. Well, what's the result? Is your government going to actually adjust their foreign policy? Have you shown that it's successful? I mean, that's a superficial thing. Right. It's like giving people these kinds of pressure release valves to say, well, at least we can do this. And they end in that. At least we can vote for a new leader every 4 years. Well, they're going to do the exact same thing as the last leader. They're not going to do anything substantially different. What's the meaning? Then you look at on-the-ground metrics. And in terms of, like you were saying, relieving poverty and bringing economic opportunities to Xinjiang, that was a key integral part of the reduction of terrorism as well. Because when you take away people's livelihoods, their options, it's easier for them to fall into this. I interviewed a guy who in his youth was associated with Al-Qaeda, and he was talking about that's exactly what happened in Iraq. That's how they had a sudden surge in terrorism. When they went in and destabilized Iraq, especially when it came to Iraq's security forces, they didn't have an employment anymore. They didn't have jobs anymore. It was so easy to radicalize them. And they are, like, battle-hardened, trained military people who are joining joining the military. So I think that's what it's kind of, like you were saying with Richard Nephew, they know exactly what they're doing with these sanctions.
One thing that I want to circle back a little bit to the beginning of that video is this idea of democracy and that your vote is actually going to have any effect on your life. Democracy in America is mostly defined by everybody as one person, one vote, and then you get to choose. Democracy in China is by representation, but the most important part of it is the consultative side, where they ask people on the ground, okay, we want to do this, how can we do it together? Or we have this problem, how do we solve it? And problems are solved on the ground at small scale and at large scale, and that impacts the lives of people. This is one of the reasons why a lot of the people in China trust their government. Now, I want to show you a very short clip before we continue with this to explain to you the level of hypocrisy in American politics. We all started talking about this Hunter Biden laptop, right? And we see him with women, we see him doing drugs. I want you to watch this video for a second. It's a very short video. Do let me know if the sound is okay, please, in the comments.
If you have a piece of crack cocaine no bigger than this quarter that I'm holding in my hand, $1/4 of $1, we passed a law through the leadership of Senator Thurmond and myself and others, a law that says if you're caught with that, you go to jail for 5 years. You get no probation. You get nothing other than 5 years in jail. Judge doesn't have a choice.
My question to the audience is, and my question to all those of you in America who believe in your system is, we've seen Hunter Biden doing crack cocaine. Why isn't he in jail? This is Joe Biden in 1994 passing something called the crime bill. And he's very proud of it, that he was one of the ones who brought it to the Senate and it passed into law. Why is justice for some but not for all? I think that this is just more of that divide and that lack of trust in government. You've all seen those videos of the economy in California, where basically they've made a law that if you steal under $1,000, if I'm not mistaken, then the police is not going to pursue. And people are just going in, filling up bags with stuff and walking out. I do have a question. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but I have a question. What's the point of going into a liquor store and stealing all this alcohol, which is the video that I watched? Are you going to consume all that liquor, or your intention is to sell it and make some money? Because who's going to buy it knowing that you can walk in, grab a bottle and go out? When the morals are not there, when the morals are no longer there, the decay in the system of values of a country are so low, you start, why would I pay for this? Why would I pay for this? That's California for you. So that video to me is very important, because that question needs to be asked to Joe Biden. And this is going to come back and bite Joe Biden in the butt, basically. This, I want to tie it up to perhaps the last topic. We're almost running on an hour. The FBI search of Mar-a-Lago. This is one of those topics that is dividing everybody in terms of information and misinformation, and is one of the things that is bringing America down the drain. The facts are simple, in my opinion. He took documents to Mar-a-Lago that he should have not taken. That's a crime. How the justice system is going to deal with that, slap in the wrist or go for charges, etc., 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 it's a different story. But that is a crime. So now, of course, we see the FBI putting their hands on the scale, because basically is going to affect Trump's run for the next election, is probably going to benefit Joe Biden. The fact that they didn't run the Hunter Biden laptop story helped Joe Biden. So you can see that there are thumbs on the scale here and there by an entity that Mark Zuckerberg claims to be, it's a reputable entity. What's your take on the role of justice and how it's being abused to confuse and obfuscate things? Who would like to go first?
I don't know. Yeah, for me, that story, I comment a lot on U.S. Politics and things like that. But the truth is that, there's corruption, there's all this kind of stuff. The most important thing for me is showing the hypocrisy. So for this story hasn't really captured my attention too much. I think for sure it looks like the institutions are going to misuse this as an opportunity to prevent Trump from running again. Because, I think the biggest issue with Trump is he was so far off from any other president in terms of not doing things the way that things are supposed to be done. He was critical of NATO. Don't get me wrong. This doesn't mean I'm not a fan of Trump. He's got a lot of issues, but he dropped the least number of bombs. He did, so I think to protect the institutions in America and the way that things work, they need to find any way to bring him down. So I think for sure they're gonna exploit this as an opportunity. But getting into the nitty gritty of it, it doesn't really interest me. My interest in U.S. politics is showing the hypocrisy. And I was just having this conversation with a really good friend from Urumqi actually a while back, and it ties into that. Like we were talking about. So you were talking about the prison system and how they have legitimate actual slave labor there while they're trying to find slave labor in China. And it's this hypocrisy. The specific topic I was talking to him about was the idea that Russia had these red lines with a country that's right on its border, which the West doesn't seem as it doesn't consider a legitimate claim. But then all of a sudden, the Solomon Islands, that's thousands of miles off the coast of the U.S., is having a security partnership with China is a red line of the West that suddenly everybody needs to recognize. So my friend responded to me from Urumqi. He said it in Chinese, but roughly translated, he says, well, it's like a goat and a sheep. He said, the goat walks around with its tail pointing up, so you can always see his asshole. But a sheep, his tail points down, so you don't see it. But when it starts running and the tail starts bouncing up and you see it, it's something special. And you say, oh my God, an asshole. I'm sure it sounds way better in Chinese, but that's my interest. I went way off of your topic, but that's why you're probably not going to get more in-depth answer.
That's a nice one.
That thing, yeah.
I wanted to bring it back to. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Go, Harold.
I agree. I don't want to get into U.S. politics into depth, but I think one aspect that's very important is the punishment of government officials. I think that's really a topic that should be highlighted more. And somebody commented also that Hillary Clinton did the same. She used a private server for emails and everything. Again, I don't want to comment. I don't know the details of it enough. But the point that I think is very important is like the war crimes, like killing civilians, knowingly killing civilians. And yeah, you cannot punish the little soldier who pressed the button. But in the end, the one who's responsible is the commander in chief. And that's every single US president for I don't know how long, who have commanded strikes on civilians that people died without any respect for human rights. And that's not an issue, but they care about some documents that were stored in the wrong location, right? And when it comes in general to punishing government officials, one thing that I always notice in reporting on China, like recently these protests at a very small local bank in Henan, right? like Western people aren't aware. I've seen videos now on YouTube saying there's a bank collapse, a financial crash coming in China, and as proof they talk about a protest in front of this bank in Henan, which is like a village bank. It's like really, really not relevant for the financial system. It's a problem for those people who had money stored there and couldn't withdraw that for a while. But what is not reported in the West is that in the next step, first the government gave like a minimal limit so that poor people could withdraw some money. And then local officials got punished. And yes, there was this abuse of the health code, COVID codes that turned red so people couldn't go to the bank. Again, officials got punished for it. But I don't see that happening. And like in the US, also in Europe, like they always say like, oh, the punishment is they don't get reelected. But do they? I mean, they get reelected because of partisan politics, especially in the US with the two-party system. All they have to do is paint the other party as even more dangerous and worse and everything. So they will get reelected and they will not be punished. Like even this FBI raid, I don't think Trump is ever going to prison for anything. And same for Hillary Clinton and for George Bush. None of them will go to prison. Okay, Chinese presidents haven't gone to prison, but Chinese officials at very high levels, they can go to prison if they do illegal things. And that's never reported. And if it's reported, then it's presented as like a conspiracy theory of, power politics only without any talk about what they actually did in terms of crimes, corruption, etc. So I think that's a very important aspect if we look at this raid in Mar-a-Lago. With regards to China.
One of the things that upsets me a lot is the lack of consequence. The lack of consequence for American leaders, like we've talked before, from Bush to Clinton to Obama to Trump. They've all pursued these wars in other countries, and they have paid no consequence. Perhaps the one that has upset me the most is this Nancy Pelosi, who did a town hall in 2021 with Jake Tapper, and she said, like, look, I was part of the Intelligence Committee in the Senate, and we knew that there were no weapons of mass destruction. If that acceptance of knowing that it was a lie, and yet they all decided to go to war and kill millions of brown people, brings no consequence to the United States, brings no consequence to this particular member of the Senate, then why are we following these leaders? Why are we following this country? How are they the beacon of freedom and democracy? And they're not. They're murderers. They're hegemonic. Why are we doing what they say? These changes in the global south, particularly in my neighborhood, Latin America, are going to be very interesting. There's now 15 presidents, if I'm not mistaken, in Latin America that are leaning left. My president decided to resume diplomatic relations with Venezuela, full-on diplomatic relations. That's going to have a huge effect in this particular bloc, their commerce, their exchanges, Venezuela is going to start breathing a lot easier. Now, I think that the next step is going to be Cuba, bringing Cuba into a more dynamic economic circle at the chagrin of the United States. Okay, guys, why don't we throw in our last thoughts on this idea of misinformation and censorship, and then we wrap up the video. So why don't we go with you, Daniel? What is your last thought that you would like to share with the audience?
I guess tying in the two last thoughts on the situation, if they do go after Trump and they do actually prosecute him, it'll just be another example of unequal application of the justice system. There's plenty of reason to want to take him out in terms of him not being enough of a supporter of the existing establishment. Again, I'm not a Trump supporter, and he'd be a terrible person to live under with his kind of, racist antics. But he messes up the system a little bit more, and he's a little bit too transparent. When he was talking about Syria, he was just saying directly, he was saying, we're going there for the oil. we've got troops left there for the oil. We're taking the oil. And even a Fox host was like, well, we're not going to take the oil, are we? He's like, well, why not? You know, maybe we should.
Maybe we should.
And so it shocks everybody. And it's just, he's completely transparent about the items of U.S. empire that he wants to continue going on. And that was very useful. That's very useful for an international audience. But now the U.S. is still taking oil out of Syria. Nobody's really talking about it anymore. Now you've got France, and I believe the U.S. is also going in and looking to take Yemen's oil now. Nobody's talking about it because they're much better at softening the language or making it seem like they're the good guys. So it's an unequal application of justice. It's the same unequal application of justice they want to force on the entire world. I'm fine if every last American doesn't want to see the nuance of what happened in the Ukraine-Russia conflict and really understand how we got to this position and just wants to superficially just say, Putin's a war criminal, end of story. We need to find a way to get him into an international criminal court. Sorry, can you still hear me? I lost your image there.
Yes, we're good. We're good.
Yeah, we need to get him into an international tribunal and try him for war crimes and prosecute him or whatever it is. Great. You know what? I'm fine if you think that. But then let's start with the U.S. presidents also, because you've got plenty of war criminals who haven't been brought to justice. You've got from Obama to Bush. I mean, all of them. You've got kids who are still being born in Fallujah today from spent munition weapons that were used on them. And their children are being born with the most debilitating birth defects. I mean, children in Vietnam are still being born with birth defects from Agent Orange.
Cambodia,
there's a long list
Laos.
of war criminals in the U.S. that we should start holding accountable if we want to do this. So fine. All right. You think that Putin, there's some sort of an operation that happened that deserves him to be prosecuted? Great. All right. But you can't apply it. You can't apply this unequally. Otherwise, this isn't about criminal justice. This is just about targeting people that you don't like. So I think those are some of the things that people need to keep in mind. I've said what I've said earlier on the misinformation thing, and people should definitely continue paying attention, especially to the language, like you said.
Harold, final thoughts?
Yeah, we didn't even discuss this further, but people who are interested in it, I've published a video yesterday. You'll find the link to my channel, it's about the question of the political system and the importance of censorship, or the damage of censorship within a political system, where I think, like, people always call me a hypocrite if I criticize censorship in the US and then live in China. But I think it's really important to realize the design of the Chinese system is that the representative talks to the local population, and the local, officials and Communist Party members, they are within the population and get the mood, hear what people really care about, and then carry it to the higher level and in the end to the national level. And on different level is decided what needs to be done. It doesn't always work perfect. There's always problems with it, but that's the design of the system. Within the system, there is no need for a nationwide public debate on solutions, what China should do and how the leadership should be composed. So the censorship of certain topics does not really affect the system from working, as long as those officials in their positions do what they're supposed to do and talk to the local population that they represent and get the mood of what's wrong. And the censorship mostly is about questions of how to solve problems and how to do the leadership. So you cannot discuss who should be the leader of China. But it's much less strict when it's about complaining about your daily life. Like, there's so many videos of Chinese people on social media complaining about what they see in their city and their daily life, what's annoying them, even also local officials, how they're treated. And these kind of complaints, that's okay, because then you just tell the government these are the issues that you need to solve. The US political system by design is completely different. The idea is that there's this big public debate through which the main ideas of driving the country forward get decided and then are taken to the government, and the people put pressure on the government to implement these ideas that come from the public debate. So in that system, by design, if the government starts taking out part of the public discourse, it makes the system, by its own logic, default. Like, it makes the system ineffective. It doesn't work anymore the way it's supposed to work. And maybe that statement is a bit, too forgiving regarding the differences of political designs. But I just feel it's always important to judge people by their own standards. And if we judge the US by the US standard, they're completely falling apart. They're really going in a direction that would have shocked the founders of the US. Whereas the Chinese political system is pretty much working according to its design, and it's constantly changing and it's being improved. But I think you can feel it on the streets in China that the system is working just by looking at how the country is moving forward. And so it's maybe a bit theoretical thought, but I think it's really important. When we talk about hypocrisy, I think the thought to judge each system by its own values and its own logic. And even in that way, it's very clear that the US is hypocrite towards its own system design.
And it boils it down to something really simple also. It can boil it down to something really simple for people who want to focus their time on trying to change other countries or things on the other side of the planet, instead of trying to use their so-called democratic freedoms to fix their own countries. If you think that China shouldn't live under any sort of censorship, that the internet should be completely free and open, lead by example. Show us that you do it first, because obviously that's not happening in your country. If you care about journalistic freedoms and you think there aren't enough journalistic freedoms in China, lead by example. Show us that you can get Julian Assange free, who's being persecuted and nearly killed in a prison in Belmarsh, being extradited to the US, a country that there were leaked documents saying that they were considering actually assassinating him. If you want to hold foreign leaders like Putin accountable for war crimes, for what you consider to be war crimes, fine, lead by example. Show us how you persecute your war criminals. If you want to lead by example and say that freedom involves being able to hold your political leaders accountable through a system of voting or whatever it is, show it. Use your power to stop your governments from doing these kinds of things, these kinds of aggressive acts overseas. Show us that it works. Otherwise, you're not in a really good position to be virtue signaling others, especially if your solution is for these countries to adopt the same system that you haven't even proven works, that you haven't even proven has the capability to do all these things that you say it can do.
I want to wrap up to talk about this that Walkabout Rojo just put on the screen. There are plenty of journalists out there who are doing all of this.
I want to add to that. That's true. That's true. Actually, sorry. Just one quick thing. This is a good friend of ours. So yeah, that's true. And that's the thing. That's where the conversation ends. It's like, at least we can talk about this. At least we can protest. At least we can report this in the news. Some of the things, there are things that are throttled. But what's the result? Does it actually result in Julian Assange becoming free? Does it actually result in any sort of a major shift in U.S. foreign policy where they stop these kinds of things that they're continually doing under recycled excuses over and over again? That's the key, is that sure, we can talk about it. We see journalists who are trying really hard. But what changes? Show us the successes, and then you can say, all right, other countries can adopt systems like ours. Even then, it would be a little bit presumptuous. But I would think that that's at least a bare minimum to show that being able to talk about it, being able to change your leader every 4 years actually makes material change in these things.
I watched a video by a journalist, a Western journalist from mainstream media, who was attacking Western platforms like YouTube and Twitter, saying that the gray zone and Aromate specifically are Russian misinformation, and that they should be the platform, sort of like what has happened to George Galloway. They should be called state media, or they should be the platform, because they don't like the message that they're sending out there. And we're going back to the origin of this video. Was the Hunter Biden laptop misinformation? No, it wasn't. It was actually true. Is what Aromate and the Gray Zone and all these great guys doing great work out there misinformation, or is it something that just doesn't go along the rhetoric that the United States wants? And my final thought is right here in the comment. A lot of people are being censored in Twitter. Remember who is Twitter's cybersecurity partner, or one of the cybersecurity partners, I don't know if they have many, is ASPI. is ASPI. And they are directly funded by Department of Defense, Department of State, and several military-industrial complex companies. So the conflict of interest is there. Mark Zuckerberg was asking, okay, who am I to say what's the truth and what's not?
Yeah.
Well, now we have a group, a think tank like ASPI, telling people what you can see on Twitter and what you cannot. People should stop and wonder, what are the effects of this alliance between Twitter and ASPI? If you guys want to elaborate one last idea about what I just brought up, let me know.
You briefly touched upon it during the stream, but we didn't go down. And I think it would have been really important to question whether governments or private companies censor, because, I mean, you can be cynical about governments and how politicians only care about themselves, but at least in theory, the government's purpose is to look for the development of the country and for the well-being of the people, whereas private companies do not even morally have any reason why they should care about that. Companies' purpose is to make money. So I'm much more worried about how our freedom is limited by private companies than by the governments, because at least the government, if they fail, there's revolution. And, you know, don't tell me, Chinese oppression, they cannot make revolution. Like the East Germans revolution, any system can have a revolution if people really feel too bad in it. So the government has some moral obligation to work in the interest of the people, which companies do not. And so to give all these very relevant decisions, what to censor, what's real, what's not real, what's a lie, what's truth, to private companies who only care about their profits and their shareholders, I think that's a horrible decision.
Well, that's essentially what's happening when the U.S. government is involved in censorship, though. Because, I mean, it's basically run by corporations. To become a senator, the average spend is $11 or $12 million. There are corporations that are funding that activity, their campaigns and all this stuff. They're not giving it for free. They're hoping for a return on investment. And when you've got the military industrial complex that has their hands in government as much as it does right now, too, well, then all of a sudden that idea of these politicians, first and foremost, standing up for the rights and interests of ordinary people is corrupted. The whole idea of that is corrupted. And we see it over and over again. I mean, Julian Assange famously said, with Afghanistan, the goal was not to fight a successful war. It was to, fight it as long as possible, to wash money out of the U.S. tax basins into the national security elites. With the ASPI partnership with Twitter, I don't know whether this is a direct a result of that or not, but I saw that firsthand when ASPI slandered Robbie and from the Australian Citizens Party and said he aggressively harassed somebody at this event. They actually scrubbed the video from their own YouTube video so that everybody just had to take their word for it. Luckily, somebody with Robbie recorded it, and when we uploaded it, and it completely contradicted what all of them were saying. When Kurt, one of our friends, tried to retweet it, everybody was saying they can't see that retweet. It was censored. My retweet with the subtitled video of what actually unfolded it was basically censored. And I think when it comes down to when you're talking about Aaron Mate and the gray zone and stuff like that, when somebody gets a little too effective at what they're doing, and I think you're going to see more and more of this. I think this is a prediction I'm going to make. You're going to see more and more censorship out of the U.S. as they get more desperate and as they start losing the narrative. Totally. It's the exact same reason why they completely censored RT. Most people need a VPN now in the U.S., ironically, to go and watch RT videos or, get their side of the story, which is kind of ridiculous. Even if you don't want to believe them. Like I remember somebody talking about, somebody who stands up for the Palestinians and stuff like that. And he says the first thing he always does when something happens is he reads the Israeli newspapers to get their side of the story, to see how are they spinning this or what are they saying happened. It's the same thing with this. With this war, you want to see, well, okay, so we're saying this happened. What are the Russians saying about how this unfolded? And then people can make up their minds for themselves. So now gray zone is getting a little bit too effective. So you're going to see them do everything they can to try to get rid of them. If Chinese state media ever became actually good and not a dumpster fire like it is now, I think you'd probably see a similar kind of a thing. But China's not very good at telling their story. Their state media's not very good at what they do. So it's not as much of a threat right now. But I think we're going to start seeing more and more of this kind of censorship. It's a natural thing that's happened before too. During World War II or World War I, there were certain democratic freedoms even that were suspended during that time, during times of war. And this to them is an information war, and it's a battle to continue to control the status quo, which is their hegemony over the world. So I think get ready for more of this and be on alert, because it's going to start to get a lot more wide-spanning and probably a lot more obvious too. I think we're going to get to a certain point where if you don't see what's going on, there's really nothing else that's going to take you over the edge.
Right. All right. Gentlemen, thank you so very much for joining me. Daniel, thanks so much for taking the time. We started without you, but we really glad that you make it and could contribute to the show. Harold, thank you so much. Everybody who's watching, please make sure to search on YouTube Harold in China and go subscribe to his channel. Extremely smart. I met you, I don't know, a year, 2 years ago, and I want to have you on my channel as often as I can. So make sure to go and subscribe to his channel and follow him on Twitter as well. Guys, that's all the video that we have for today, all the time. Thank you so much. Remember, if you like this content, give it a thumbs up. And if you like the content of our channels, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell button to be notified whenever there's a new video out. And, well, until we see you again, thank you all so very much. Have a nice day. Bye, Daniel. Bye, Harold.
See ya.
Thank you. See you both. Good.